Okay, so I hope this is visible. Okay, just give me a moment. Okay. All right. So I think this should be good. So I guess this is visible, right? Okay. I think so. Now, I'll also request all of you as much as possible to just keep yourself on mute. And then some of you are actually co-hosts with me. So in case you see somebody by mistake has unmuted, just make sure that you mute the people. Okay, so we are starting the series on the royal review. So we will be studying the kings of Israel and Judah. Now, the reason we are taking up this study is because most of you will know that a major portion of the Bible actually is recorded during the times of the kings. Okay. So when you look at the Old Testament from First Samuel all the way till Malachi, okay, from First Samuel all the way till the prophet Malachi, whatever is recorded for us, okay, it happens during the times of the kings of Israel or Judah or both of them. Okay. So that is where the whole thing happens. So we have the historical books of, Samuel and all of that. Then we have Psalms. Then, Proverbs is there. We have the prophets all the way till Malachi, the major prophet, the minor prophet. All of them are recorded in the context of the kings of Israel and Judah, except for a few. You do have, things like Ezra, Nehemiah, Job. Job actually, most church historians will say that Job was recorded, even before Abraham's time. Okay, that is when Job was alive. So Job and then Ezra, Nehemiah happened after the exile. Okay, so we will look at all of that. So, but apart from that, a major portion of the Old Testament is recorded during the times of the kings of Israel and Judah. And one of the things that I personally realize is that when I understand which king ruled when and which prophet spoke at that time, it actually helped me to understand the Old Testament much better than what I did before. Okay. Why did Isaiah give the message like that? Why did Ezekiel give the message like that? Why was Amos's message like that? So, all of this, most of the Old Testament, when we understand who ruled when, who ruled where, and which prophet brought the message of God to them, it actually helped me to understand a lot of this message of the Old Testament. Now, I want to make a confession is that as a teenager, when I started reading the Bible, all of you know that I come from another faith background. But as a teenager, when I actually started reading the Bible, I would assume that the prophets were written after the last king of Judah. Okay, so after the last king of Judah, it was only after that that the prophets were written. It was only later that I realized that the prophets and the kings go simultaneously. It's just that the Bible is, presented in that way that you have the chronological books, the historical books, and then you have all of those books. Okay. Now, when you look at this, today's session will be more of an introduction. We will see, how from First Samuel chapter 8, how the people of Israel actually wanted a king, why they wanted a king. So we'll give that context from today. But today would be more of an introductory session. So I just wanted to make sure that all of us know what we will be doing. Okay, so broad outline of what we will follow. Now, when Israel wanted a king, remember it was the United Kingdom. And together, the kingdom was called Israel. So that is when Israel wanted a king. It was the United Kingdom. Okay. So God brought the Israelites out of Egypt. When they came out of Egypt, Moses was ruling over them. Moses was the leader, not their king. Moses was the leader. Moses then prepared Joshua. God prepared Joshua. Then Joshua became the leader. Then when Joshua died, what did Joshua do? Joshua actually prepared multiple, okay, leaders. And as a result, after Joshua's death, you recognize that there are the things called the judges. That was the time of the judges. They were not kings. They were not officially appointed as judges, but as the need came, God raised men and women, and they became judges for the kings of Israel, the nation of Israel. They became judges for the nation of Israel. And then the Bible talks about a person called Samuel. Okay. We know Samuel's mother. Hannah. And so the Bible talks about Samuel. Samuel became a prophet, became a priest, almost like a leader, had multiple roles. So it was during Samuel's time, when Samuel was about to die, that the United Kingdom of Israel asked for a king. And today we will see, the context of why they asked for a king. Now, in the United Kingdom, there were three kings. Saul was the first king from the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. Now, we will see again, why Saul couldn't continue to be a king. We will come to that later. So Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, became the first king. Then came David, and then came Solomon. Okay. So under these three, the kingdom was united. Solomon, surprisingly, supposed to be one of the wisest kings to rule. Okay. Everybody considers Solomon to be a very, very wise king, a very, very wise man. But we recognize that there were a lot of trouble. There were a lot of wrong things. There were a lot of, injustice that Solomon had done. And as a result, we recognize that because of some of the things that Solomon had done, the kingdom divided into two. Okay. So then you had the kingdom divided into two. And then the kingdom was called Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. Under Judah, only two tribes were there. That is Judah and Benjamin. Israel had all the other tribes. Okay, the northern kingdom had all the other tribes. So the United Kingdom had only three kings. After Solomon, there was a division between Israel and Judah. And that is the reason why when you look at the Bible in the Old Testament especially, a lot of the messages given to Israel, a lot of the messages given to Judah. So these were two different geographical locations to whom the message was given. And then when we looked at the book of Amos, we recognize in Amos, most of the message was meant for the people of Israel, though a lot also was meant for the people of Judah. So these are the kings that we will see for our study, okay? We will see the United Kingdom kings as well, Saul, David, Solomon, we will see them as well, very important. But we will also see the kings under the divided monarchy, the divided kingdom. So Rehoboam and Jeroboam, okay, that is when they were the first kings of the divided monarchy. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. Jeroboam was a rebel, and that is how the kingdom got divided. Then under Judah, you have Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, all of these, all the way till Zedekiah. So when you come to Jehoiakim and Zedekiah, that was the time when King Nebuchadnezzar attacks Judah and takes them into captive. Okay, that's Jehoiakim and Zedekiah. And then on the other side of the chart, we have Israel starting with Jeroboam the first, and then Nadab, Baasha, Elah, all the way till Pekah and Hoshea. Okay. Now here is one comment that all of us we need to remember. Okay, আমাদের এই জিনিসটা একটা মনে রাখতে হবে। জিনিসটা হচ্ছে কি, ইসরায়েলে যটা কিং ছিল, all the kings of Israel, all of them were very, very evil. Okay, none of them feared God. They were more interested in the pagan practices of the neighboring nations. So all the kings of Israel, none of them feared God. They were all evil kings. And one of the kings that became like the epitome, okay, of evil, সবথেকে যে বাজে রাজা ছিল, that was Ahab, that we see from 874 to 853. That is, the king Ahab, his wife was there, Jezebel, so the most evil king. But all the kings of Israel recorded for us are the ones that did evil in the eyes of God. Judah, on the other hand, there were quite a few kings who actually loved God and wanted to live in accordance to God, in honor for God. Okay, you have Jehoshaphat, you have a lot of them here. Okay, you have Hezekiah, you have Josiah, all of these, kings that, tried their best to love God and honor him. Okay, so this is, the basically the kings that we'll be looking at, and what does the Bible talk about them. Okay, and then, there'll be very interesting things we'll know about each of these kings as mentioned in the Bible, and also, things that may not be mentioned in the Bible, but a lot of, church historians and, scholars would say these things about the king. Okay, so this is what we will look. Okay, so we will look at the United Kingdom, Saul, David, Solomon, and then we'll look at the divided kingdom, all of these divided kingdom, kings that were there. And we are hoping that this will give a lot of context to the Old Testament. আমাদের সাহায্য করবে যাতে পুরাতন নিয়ম আমরা ভালো করে বুঝতে পারি। Okay, so today we will begin as an introduction. So we'll start by looking at 1 Samuel chapter 8 verses 1 to 22. Let me read that for you. 1 Samuel chapter 8 verses 1 to 22. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Then Samuel said to the Israelites, "Everyone, go back to your town." Now, this first Samuel chapter 8 is like an introductory chapter to the nation of Israel's desire for a king. না এইখানে দেখা হচ্ছে কিভাবে ইসরায়েলের লোকেরা চেয়েছিল একটা রাজা. Now, when you look at this chapter, there are a lot of, small things that we understand that helps us to, not only learn lessons, but also helps us to understand the context of those times. Okay. From chapter 9 next week that we will look at, we will see that the whole focus shifts on Saul, because Saul would be the first king. But today, let us learn a few lessons from chapter 8. Now, when we look at chapter 8, we recognize that this is almost like the swan song of Samuel. Okay. This is the last, okay, of the chapter that is really, focusing on Samuel. Though Samuel doesn't die, Samuel still appears. He anoints Saul. He even, when God rejects Saul, Samuel is there. He does it. But you recognize that, suddenly the focus from Samuel shifts to Saul. Now, when you look at Samuel, he was the hero of the Israelites in those days, right? He was the hero. He was the leader. He was the prophet. He was the priest. People looked up to Samuel. But this hero may not have been a perfect person, like all of us, right? We tend to deify them, right? We tend to put them on a pedestal. But this Samuel would have been just another person like you and me. By God's grace, he became a leader that he was. Okay, now what are some of the things in the context of this, demand for a king? What are some of the things that we learn? Let's learn some things from Samuel. Okay, number one, if you read it before or, even now, one of the things you will realize the Bible, talking about here, not clearly, but you see hints of it, is that Samuel did not really prepare leaders. Okay. Moses had Joshua, Joshua had the judges, but Samuel really did not prepare any leader. Okay. One of the things that, a lot of us, who are leaders, we recognize that a lot of times leadership becomes very addictive, right? We like leadership because there is that respect, there is that authority, there is all of these things that, leaders enjoy. And as a result, leadership can become very, very addictive at times. Now, though the Bible doesn't talk about it, but, there is no reason not to believe that Samuel would have also experienced this. Okay, Samuel is not God. He's a sinner. He's a weak person, just like you and for me. But when you look at this chapter 8, the whole reason why the people of Israel wanted a king is because Samuel did not prepare leaders. In fact, the Bible says that he actually appointed his two sons, Joel and Abijah, and they were serving as leaders in Beersheba. Okay. Now, when you look at Joel and Abijah, the Bible in verse 3 says his sons did not walk in his ways. So obviously, you recognize that Samuel was a great leader for the masses. He was giving direction to the masses, but when it came to his sons, he may not have trained his sons. Okay. Again, another problem with dynastic leadership. Okay. When we want our children, our children's children to take over our leadership position. Okay. It happens in politics. It happens in Christian ministries. It happens everywhere. Okay. Anywhere where there is this dynastic leadership, dynastic politics, where, we want our children, their children, our inheritance, our lineage to take care of the leadership. That is where the problem lies. In politics, we see that a lot nowadays. Nobody likes dynastic politics. If you're a gifted leader, be a leader. If you're a not gifted leader, don't do it. Okay. Even in Bollywood, right? A lot of times they talk about nepotism. What is nepotism? Is that if your dad or mom or grandfather, grandmother is a superstar, most likely you'll get a chance in a movie, right? And then you have to prove yourself. But this, you recognize, has been a problem since ancient times. Samuel did not train his sons, but he just assumed that he would pass on the leadership to his sons, and they were terrible leaders. Because they were terrible, that is the reason the people came and they asked for a king, because his sons were just terrible leaders. They had no regard for God. They did not honor God at all. But you recognize that Samuel's legacy is also very similar to his guru, his mentor, that was Eli. Remember, Eli's sons were also, people who did not honor God. His children, Eli's sons, did not honor God. They lived a very reckless life. And so Samuel, in a way, just carried forward, this legacy that he received from his mentor, Eli. And so you recognize that, a lot of our times, even in same Christian ministry, I have observed that, organizations where children don't take over the leadership position of their parents, those organizations do much better. Okay, there are so many organizations, we don't even have to look far. Even in the context of Calcutta, there are so many organizations where every time the father or the mother, who are great leaders, want their children to take over the ministry, want their children to take over the leadership. The children have no gifting, no calling whatsoever, and they become leaders in those organizations. I've seen that those ministries always fall. Okay, those ministries always come crushing down. But ministries that have just given away leadership to others, not to the children. Yes, if the children are called, that's a different thing. But if the children are not called, they just give it to, others to run the organization. Those organizations have done very well. Their children have become doctors or engineers or whatever. They are doing any other professional thing, but they have not joined ministry. I've seen that those organizations have done much better. And from the Bible, we see, very clear example of this from Samuel's life as well. One, he did not prepare leaders. Second, he may not have trained his sons. And finally, he probably did not think that his time would come to an end. He was doing so well. Israel was doing so well. In fact, when you look at chapter 7, we did not do chapter 7. If you have time, today, after we finish this, read chapter 7, you recognize that there was a great victory that the Israelites enjoyed in Mizpah under Samuel's leadership. God gave a mighty victory. Okay. And when you look at chapter 7, verses 15 onwards, the Bible says, what an influential leader Samuel was. But I think the problem with Samuel was he thought that his time would not come to an end. Again, these are speculations that I am doing. Samuel probably would not have thought about it. I don't know. But I'm just taking him as a normal human being who had experienced God's grace in abundance. Okay. And these are some of the things that we can observe about Samuel. Okay, he probably did not think his time would come to an end, did not prepare leaders, may not have trained his sons. And as a result, Israel demanded a king. Now, let's quickly look at the Israelites. What do we learn from the Israelites? Number one, see the purpose of asking for a king. They wanted to be like other nations. So many times they are saying it. You look at verse 4 and 5, right? Verse 5 says, give us a king so that the king will lead us such as all the other nations have. Then God gives the warning. But after that, again, they are saying, no. Once we have a king, then we will be like other nations. See, the The desire for the Israelites to have a king was to be like other nations. That was their only purpose. And this is the problem sometimes, even in the context of the church. See, Israel was always meant to be unlike other nations, but they wanted to be like other nations. Similar to the church is meant to be unlike the world. But a lot of times, what happens is the church gets so attracted to the things of the world that the church wants to be like the world. Now, the downfall of Israel started with this. Why? Because they wanted to be like other nations. Okay, where God set them apart, God wanted them to be unique. The people wanted to be like other nations. That was the only reason why they were asking for a king. One, one reason, of course, was that there was no good leadership. Second, they were seeing that, hey, you know what, we want to be like other nations. For them, an invisible God, okay, that they, probably did not see, probably did not hear, they were not willing to put their trust on that invisible God. So they wanted to be like other nations. And as a result, they wanted to have a king. Okay, so the purpose for wanting a king was obviously flawed. The second thing you recognize that the king, God is warning them, right? Verses 10 to 18, the king would not give them anything, but just take from them. Take away their children, take away their belongings, take away their cattle, take away their crops. So there was a price that they had to pay, to have a king. But they so wanted to be like other nations that they're telling Samuel, we are willing to pay whatever price. Just let us have a king and we will be like other nations. Okay, the king would not give but take. In fact, when you look at Solomon's life, you recognize that this things that are mentioned in verses 10 to 18 actually happened in Solomon's life. Okay, there was a lot of peace when it came to other nations, but when it came to his own people, Solomon had some very, very unreasonable demands from them that again led to the breakup of the kingdom. So the Israelites, they were willing to pay that huge price. The king would not give but take. Now, when you look at Genesis chapter 17, few verses that I wanted to share with you. Genesis chapter 17, verses 6 and then 16. See, having a king was always on God's mind, okay? God tells this to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17, verse 6. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. Then in verse 16, he's saying this too about Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Again, look at Genesis 35:11. This is God telling to Jacob. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will be among your descendants. So when you look at kingship, recognize that it was always in God's plan, in God's mind, that the people will have a king, that the people of Israel will have a king. But it had to be in God's time and it had to be God's choice. But when you look at the people of Israel, you recognize that they wanted the king immediately. And right there, you see their impatience. Okay. So one, their purpose was flawed. The whole reason they wanted the king was to be like other nations. They were willing to pay a huge price to have a king rule them. The king would not give but take from them. And they wanted the king immediately. And as a result, you recognize that, there is so much of impatience. And this is a lesson for us, okay, dear friends. A lot of times God has these good things planned. Some of the things that, we pray are exactly in God's plan. So he will answer them. But the problem is we want it immediately. We don't want God's timing. We want it immediately. And that impatience costs us a lot. And that is exactly what happened. So some scholars will say that God's plan was that David will be the first king of the people of Israel. So David at this point was not even ready. But there is a chance that God wanted David to be the first king. See, when you look at the Old Testament, especially when you look at Jacob's promise to his children, you recognize that in his blessing, Jacob had already blessed Judah as the kingly tribe. Okay. So before Jacob dies, he blesses, his sons, and he blesses Judah as the kingly tribe. So you recognize that David, who was from the tribe of Judah, would have been God's first choice to be the king. Okay. He should have been the first king. But because the people were so impatient, God gave them Saul. Saul was not from the tribe of Judah. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin was not the kingly tribe. And as a result, there was no way that Saul's lineage would continue as, as kings of the nation of Israel. But why did God make Saul the king? It was because the people were impatient. And, Saul himself was not the best king. We recognize, as we see his life story from the Bible, we see that he had his own issues. He was a very insecure king. He was not the best, but God used Saul to kind of prepare the nation for the real king that was David. Okay. And so you recognize, from the people of Israel, these are some of the things that we learn. Okay. There was impatience. And, for us as children of God, will be good for us, when we are in prayer, not to be impatient. Sometimes we are praying in the will of God, but let God handle it, the timing on when he'll answer that prayer. Okay. So these are some of the things that we learn from Israel. And then, we'll see also things from God's perspective. And then we'll close today's study. I'll give the time to Pastor Bhagirathi and he'll facilitate some discussions. Now, when you see things from God's perspective, what do you see? Number one, this is what God is telling Samuel. God is saying, Samuel, in verse 7, they have not rejected you. They have rejected me. Now, I suspect that Samuel was actually feeling very bad. No leader will like it, right? When somebody comes to them and says, hey, we need a replacement. Okay, who likes it? No leader will like it. So probably Samuel was also feeling very, very bad. In fact, when you read verses 6, the Bible says Samuel was very displeased that the people were asking for a king. And then, God brings this very beautiful principle. God says, listen, they have not rejected you, Samuel, they have rejected me. So I think that's a very good principle for us to follow, especially if we are in leadership positions, right? When people reject us and we want to obey God, when we want to honor God, we are not perfect people, we have our own limitations. But, when we are genuinely and sincerely wanting to honor God, people reject us. It is a good principle for us to remember that they are not really rejecting us, they're actually rejecting God. And one of the things that I, really always keep in mind is that, a lot of times governments, leaders, rulers of the people seem to be against the children of God. They do things that seem to be against the children of God. Always remember, they are not fighting against us. They are fighting against the God of heaven and earth. They are fighting against God. And who can stand against God, right? So when people target things against us, I think what God told Samuel is a very good lesson for us to remember. They are not rejecting you, Samuel. They're actually rejecting me. So you don't be discouraged. You don't lose heart. You don't feel bad. Put the focus on me. Okay, they are rejecting me. And when people mistreat us, I think this is good for us to remember. The second thing from God's perspective we recognize is to the Israelites. God asked them to make a decision, but with the right information. Okay, now that is something God will never, okay, force something on us. Now, Ishwar kokhono jor kore amaderke kichu dite chaye na. He wants us to make the decision, but he wants us to make the decision with the right information. And that is the reason from verses 10 to 18, God gives them the information. What will happen when a king will rule over you? The king will not give you anything. The king will take away from you everything. And with that right information, the Israelites made a decision. God did not force them. God did not, do some magic to change their mind. God let them make the decision. And that's one thing very beautiful about God, that he wants us to make decisions. See, a lot of times we don't make decisions. We don't make choices because we are waiting for God to reveal his will. Okay. Yes, sometimes he reveals his will very clearly, but there are times, according to Ecclesiastes, he doesn't reveal his will very clearly. There's always a doubt. That is when Ecclesiastes says that if it is in your heart, you do it. Just do it. Why? Because, we need to make that decision with the right information. And here you recognize God doing exactly that. He's letting the Israelites make a decision, but he wants them to make the decision with the right information. So the Israelites were very aware of what they were getting into when they demanded for a king. Okay, and that's a very beautiful thing I learned about God when he let the people of Israel make that decision. And finally, you see, it's very beautiful now. A seemingly wrong desire was turned into good, was turned into the best thing, right? Jesus was born in a kingly lineage. Okay, so remember what I told about the Israelites. Why did they want a king? They wanted a king just to be like the other nations, the pagan nations that were surrounding. But what seemed to be a wrong decision, God turned it into something so beautiful that Jesus was born in a kingly lineage. And that is the reason when you look at the New Testament, right? Some of us already memorized that verse. All things work together for good of those that love God, who are called according to his purpose, right? You recognize that even sometimes the seemingly wrong decisions we make, the wrong choices we make, or something that is not right happening in my life, you recognize that God, in his sovereignty, in his power, is able to turn that into something very, very beautiful, into something very, very good, right? And that is exactly what you see here. 1 Samuel chapter 8 is almost like a chapter that talks about the Israelites' rebellion. They rejected God. They wanted an earthly king, be like the neighboring nations. But God took their wrong desires and decisions and turned into something very, very good. Now, does it justify the wrong desire? It doesn't justify, okay? Wrong is wrong, but it just shows that no matter what I do, no matter what decisions I make, God is able to do something good out of it, okay? If I make the right decision, well and good. If I make the wrong decision, it is obviously not well and good. That is the reason the Bible says, James chapter 1, if any one of you lacks wisdom, he or she should ask God, and God will give you without anything. Okay. God will give you unlimited. He will not hold back. He will give you that wisdom. Why is James talking about wisdom? Because James recognizes that many times in life, we have to make a decision. May we depend on God's wisdom, make the right decision, and allow God to turn that right decision into something beautiful rather than make a wrong decision. God will anyway turn it into something beautiful. But, according to the Bible, we rather make a right decision and experience the joys of it rather than make a wrong decision. That leads to heartbreak, but then again rejoice in God's faithfulness, but that's his faithfulness. Okay. So when you look at this chapter, which serves as an introduction to our study, you recognize this is the context in which the people of Israel wanted a king. They wanted to be like other nations. Okay. They were so attracted to other nations, things of the world, so attracted to that. Now the Church of Jesus Christ has to be very, very careful. We cannot always be attracted to the things of the world. Okay. Attraction to the things of the world is a sign of spiritual decay. Okay. Attraction to the things of the world is a sign of spiritual decay. Now, when I'm doing spiritually well, I can take things of the world and turn it into something good. That's a different case. But when I'm just attracted to the things of the world, it just is a sign of spiritual decay, which again, shows the people of Israel were so attracted to their neighbors. It was a sign of the spiritual decay. And why it started? It started because Samuel did not prepare the right leaders. Okay. Very, very important for us to prepare people, to have the right people, for a time when we are not there. Extremely important. And then, closing it, from God's perspective, to Samuel, he said, they've not rejected you, they have rejected me. To the Israelites, he said, make a decision with the right information, and a seemingly wrong desire was turned into something beautiful and good. Jesus was born in a kingly lineage. So here we'll end with today's study, and I'll give the time over to Pastor Bhagirathi.